Composite Gloves here, and today we are doing a video on the time stretching in the sampler channel. So I'm going to show you some of the things that I typically use, and then I'm also going to explain some of the ways things work. So first off, you have your typical pitch bend. So this is very, very useful for, so you load up a sample. Go watch my part 1 of this video that explains the sampler channel if you are honestly confused about this. And what it is you open it up and you can pitch bend the material down here. So I've got this little vocal sample. Yeah, I know, it's amazing. So what it is, oh, that's interesting. There's silence at the end. Maybe, I don't know. And what you can do is you can right click to type in a value if you know your value, but it's also just as easy to drag. And while you're dragging, you want to look up here in the hint window to see how far you're dragging it. So 100 cents is equivalent to 1 note on the piano keyboard. So you've essentially dragged it 2 notes or a whole step. You can keep going all the way down to an octave. So you can go down to where it's the same note, only lower. And of course, you can get the middle stuff. If you hold down, what is it? If you hold down Control, yeah, Control gives you more fine abilities to drag it to what you want. You can Alt click to reset it. So that simply just moves the pitch. You have a multiplier. Now, the multiplier is really cool in that it will simply multiply the time. So if I totally missed. Wow. Okay, so if we multiply this, let's say I could multiply it to like 50%, 25% with that. So you see that way it shortens it. If we go the other way, it lengthens it out. And so that is that. I'll click to reset it. So if you know what you want and you just need to duplicate how long it is, then you simply do that. Very, very easy. Another method, you can click here for stretch. Make sure you have your sample setting on up here for this. You click stretch and you will be able to stretch your tempo around. Well, not your tempo, your sample around. Another thing you do is you can hit Shift M and it will toggle stretch for you. So while you're working, you can do that. Now, there is another thing. So I use Shift M actually quite a bit, along with the pitch option. Now time I don't really ever touch. Time is something that I let do its own thing when I use my resampling modes. So resampling, or not resampling, but my time stretching mode. So there's a whole bunch of different ways to time stretch. One is like you oversample it and then you remove samples in a way that will allow you to speed up or slow down the sample. And there's one that ignores pitch and focuses on how long the sample is. One is how long the sample is, and I was about to say the other thing backwards. And then the other one, of course, ignores how long the sample is and focuses on pitch. And then there is a way, it's a very complicated way that is kind of mysterious. It is the stretch method, and it does some pretty incredible things. So let's talk about this. So resample, so this mode, so okay. Back it up. Let's go back to the time knob real quick. There are a couple things about a time knob. So you could be wanting to restretch something for a number of reasons. You could have like some sort of track you're trying to remix, or you could have a drum loop, or you could have a singer or whatever. And so it just varies on what you want to do. So if you have like specific questions, like you're going to have to do a little bit of research and figure it out. So if you right click though, you will see that we can auto detect the tempo in this sample. So usually it does a pretty good job too. However, if you know what it is, you might want to set it yourself by coming down here and going to, which I talked about in the previous video, detect tempo, and it will have it there. And you can also just type in a tempo. If you know the beats, like how many bars it's supposed to be too, you can also include that, which is also very helpful for things like drum loops. But you can also slave the time to the project tempo. So if you slave it to the project tempo, now if you go to resample mode, so this is the first options here we have are real time. So this has to do with it being played back in real time. Now, if you do this to slave to project tempo, and you're not at the correct project tempo, this could be a bad deal. Like I'm at 201 beats per minute, so that's like really fast. But if I were to play it now, if I increase my tempo or decrease my tempo, the time will adjust itself to play at the correct tempo. Yeah. So you see the pitch went up. What does this mean? So it looks like it's staying the same. Time looks like it's staying the same, but it's been slaved to my original project tempo. This means that it is being treated like a record. If you play it faster, pitch goes up. Play it slower, pitch goes down. That is resample. If you go to stretch, now stretch is really cool. Also in resample, if you have it hooked up so you can play chords, the notes will be treated so that they are not synced up. So because it's a higher pitch, it'll play faster. If it's a lower pitch, it'll play slower. Then you need your time actually be 0 for this to work. As you can see. Yeah. It's slow, fast. So it's not like rocket science. Okay, so now we have stretch. This one sort of is rocket science. At least I feel like it is. What it is it will now play back in time, keeping the key the same. And this is insane. Like what this can do, this is like a big deal. And so a lot of people really like it. I personally don't use it too much, but if you really want to go see it in action, you could check out like FL Studios Image Lines video on the what's new in FL 12.3. FL 12.3. And what it does is it will keep it. So now if I play the same thing, they're all the same length. That is incredible. If we were to come into the piano roll for this thing, write out some notes, we could like write it out at C5, and then we could use slide notes to change things. So we could like change the notes using slide notes. So you click up there for the slide note icon, and we can do something like this. Whoops, play the pattern. So we come up there. So now we can, it's a lot more viable because when the note gets to that note, it's going to stay the same length. Another thing that's cool is if you have a bunch of audio clips in here and you set them to stretch mode, you can change your tempo and they will play back at the same speed. Now, if we were to slow this way down, we get that sort of lo-fi type sound, but this is like this was not possible before. You speed it back up. So it maintains its rhythm. It maintains its timing. It's great. It maintains its pitch. This is like amazing. So it's got to be some crazy interpolation setting thing. If you have a bunch of stuff in there, if you go to tools, you go to macro, you can go to switch real-time stretching for all audio clips. And so if that's something that you are looking at doing, if you want to adjust the tempo as you're going for all of them, you need to be careful though if you used other time stretching modes. So this would be like, you'd probably want to make a special project to do that in. So, okay, so that's time stretching. So that's really cool. Hopefully you got some ideas here. And you can see the time knob doing its thing. We could set it back to project tempo. Okay, so now you have these ones. You have Elastic. These are great for, and then you have these. These are Legacy. So they used a, so these ones take time. They are more high quality. However, they take more time to compute because they have to do that whole calculate the samples, oversample, remove samples, is that kind of a thing. So for these, you have, these are meant for like voice. And so over here you have speech, mono, transient, generic. This one focuses on transients, preserving those, the way it interprets those. So let's give you some examples of these. So I'm going to be just doing these, but I do come over here and use these because they're really interesting. So they're just updated, maybe faster, I don't know. So we take it down mono. It sounds sort of like amplitude modulation or ring modulation to an extent. And that's a pretty cool sound. I use it all the time, but some people like generic more, but this is typically what you would hear. So it just focuses on different ways of interpolating the samples. And so you get very different results. So that's like right there. Once you hear those two, that's really it. After that, it's just sticking different material in there and seeing what it sounds like pitched up or down. There's your chipmunk. And also on the time stretch, you can maintain your tempo. So it's really, these are the ways you would sing a thing and then you would pitch it up or down. Another thing you should be really aware of when you're doing this kind of thing is the formants in your voice. And because if you get your formants right, when you pitch it up, it'll sound more natural that way. That's the main difference between voices is the formants. So, okay, now we have special, besides the fact like girl voices are, I believe it's an octave higher than guy voices. On average. So we have slice stretch and slice map. What are these? Well, they're tools for They are tools ideally meant for drums. I don't know why I had such a hard time saying that. Usually with slice markers, if your drum slice marker is, if your tempo is slower, you typically, they recommend you choose slice stretch. If it's faster than your current tempo and you want to bring it back, you use slice map. And they should, I mean, you could just drop a loop in there, but you should really insert slice markers or have a loop with slice markers. And honestly, you should just use something like SliceX if you really want to do something like that. It should just be easier. If you have slice markers, though, this can be a really, really fast thing that I like to use. You have auto, which will automatically, it's just a, I'm not, honestly, I don't know a ton about this setting, but it sounds pretty much like, it's just a different setting from the generic and mono. As you see, it sounds very, very, in fact, I think it is the same thing. So, and then you have, you know, your old ones. So the transient one, obviously it focused on saving the transients, but you come in here if you want some variation. You see, it did change. That's kind of an interesting deal. If we go to auto, it changes back, but if we go to generic, it doesn't change at all. So it's kind of a weird deal. If you have a long thing too, it might take a while to do the computation. Mono, which sounds, I feel like I feel like I can hear the difference on this one. No, I can't really hear any difference. And you have speech, which focuses on speech. So they're cool. They're just legacy modes. These, as you can see, there's not a huge difference between these two. So just different options for you. You could try these. Now, if you have a weird, like low pitch stuff, because there's the same amount of samples represent a much larger waveform, you have just the way things are interpolated gets kind of funky when you're dealing with time stretching. But that's time stretching in a nutshell. If you're doing something beat related, you want to make sure that you have your tempo correctly set. So you need to go in here and you need to figure out, make sure your tempo is correctly set. Because if it's not correctly set, especially with tonal stuff, when you time stretch later, if you're doing something rhythmic, you could run into some issues. You could also come up with some really cool vocal chop methods using this. But anyways, that's like basic time stretching 101. If you have any questions, let me know. Subscribe and have a blessed day.